Welcome to this introductory tutorial on iPhone or iOS development. What we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to build this application that you can see on the screen. It's very simple. All it's going to do is it's got a slider, several labels on it, a text box and a button. You move the slider to set your age. I've limited this to 30. You then can type in your name and press the submit button, and these will appear here. So it's a relatively simple application, but it's an ideal one to first get you into iOS development, but also to have a look at the Xcode environment and look at some of the differences between what you've conventionally done in other development environments such as Visual Studio and NetBeans, and look at the differences when you're now doing a mobile application and also doing applications and coding which is much more strongly linked to the hardware. So let's make a start. Okay, what I want you to do first of all is locate Xcode on the Mac in front of you. You will find it in the status bar at the bottom, and when you found that, I want you to launch Xcode. Okay, remember you can pause this video at any time if you are required to do something else, and then begin it again. So I'm assuming that you've located Xcode and you've loaded it, and what I'd like you to do now is to create a new project which is under the File menu. Okay, you can't see it on this screen because I'm not showing the menu bar on this particular screen, but we're not going to make too much use of them in this particular example. So what you need to do is to simply go under File, go New, and then select Project. Or you can do Shift Command N if you want to do it with a key code. Okay, once you've selected a new project, you'll get these various templates. Now, the Xcode is also for standard OS X development, for developing Mac applications. We're not going to be concerned with this because we're interested in mobile development in this case. So we're going to have a look at iOS, which is the iPhone's operating system. And you'll see you've got quite a few choices of things you can build. There's a thing known as a master detail. There's an OpenGL game which will give you a template with an OpenGL view and some other useful stuff. There's page-based applications, single view applications, tabbed applications, utilities, which are the kind of the spinny thing that you see, that's the weather application on the iPhone, for example, or a purely empty application with no template code whatsoever. What we're going to start with, as this is an introduction to iOS development, is we're going to start with a simple single view application. So we're going to select this one. Okay, once you've selected a single view application, you can select next. It's worth saying that you'll probably be working in a version of Xcode 4.2, so it may look a little bit different to what you're seeing in front of you, or may not, but just bear that in mind. But it should be no problem with going through the exercise with Xcode 4.2 that you've got in front of you, or a later version. So the first thing you see here is you have to give it a product name. What you might want to call it is something like whatever the module code is, ECWM601, whatever you're doing. And you can call it tutorial, it's a good name, such as that. You should give it an organization, and you do actually have to give it a company identifier, which gives it this bundle identifier of some sort of URL, and then the product name. It's actually essential that you do that now, and I think that the software will probably insist that you do it. So if you're not sure, you can just do com.yourname is absolutely fine. You could do uk.ac.wmin, for example. It doesn't matter what you do. This is only really important if you are submitting to the App Store, where these then need to be unique, and in that way your application is uniquely identified. Okay, so I'm happy with this. Other things to look at is I can choose what device I want to primarily target. In this case, we're going to build an iPhone application. I can do iPad, or I can do a thing known as Universal. Universal will build an application which targets both devices at the same time, and it will use you generally use different sets of views, one set of views for the iPhone and one set of views for the iPad, to do a universal. These can be a good idea, but often it's easier just to do two products if you want to target both iPad and iPhone, but perfectly possible with the universal application as well. The main point being there is that if you have an application which is designed for iPhone and iPad, chances are you will want to share lots of classes and lots of other things, even if the views are different between the two applications. But we're going to just pick iPhone. Other thing, you get tasked, you want to use storyboards. It's beyond the scope of this tutorial to go exactly what those are at the moment, but essentially they're a graphical view of your application. The other thing is we're asked, do we want to use automatic reference counting? You will always say yes in this case. It probably shouldn't even really be a question anymore. And this is a way of ensuring that we don't get memory leaks and other problems. Okay, once we're happy with that, we will ignore the unit test for now. We do next. Okay, what it will do now, it will ask you to save this in some location. I've got one pre-built one here, but you can create a new folder if you wish here, or you can just put it into some other folder location. It will sit in its own folder, so it will not put all the files out. It will already create a folder for them, so there's no problem with that. Once you're happy with it, there is an option generally to do source control using the Git repository. This is a local one, and you can use an external one, so just for information. But we're happy with that, so we're just going to create this. Okay. What we get now is another screen, which is essentially the build settings for the project. We're not going to do much. I'm not going to really go into past the summary, but if you wanted to add other frameworks, for example, other build rules, compiler rules, you could do this all here. But again, we won't get into this at this point. You can select the supported interface orientations. We'll just do the two, which is portrait and upside down. Apple usually insists that you support both portrait and upside down, or landscape left and landscape right, or even better, all four, for the sake of good usability. We're going to not really do much more with these, so we'll just leave, but there is an option of doing your application icon and a launch image, and you can set the status bar, what the default appearance is going to be as well. Okay, the other thing to have a look at then is what are the files that have been created for us. And this really makes the point that when you're targeting a specific device or doing this sort of development, it's very much tailored for the device, and so will look different to what you're perhaps used to when you're just simply coding for Windows and doing Windows forms, for example. So we're not going to go into much detail here, but we have a thing known as an application delegate. Okay, this iOS development is very strong in its object-oriented design patterns, so the concepts of delegates, models, view controllers is everywhere in this particular design methodology. So the other thing probably as a note is that we're programming in Objective-C, is a language we're using to do iOS development. Objective-C classes are actually broken over two files. We have a H file and an M file. It's not too different to how you would specify a C++ class, and it's split up in, often you can split C++ classes in the same way. It's a good way, in fact it's a good way to do it. Correct way to do it is to define the classes in a header file, and you actually implementation is done in another file. So this is the way it's done here. And it's just worth looking at this because even though we're not going to make use of it directly, the application delegate, which I'm looking at here, contains a number of methods which come with the application delegate. And they do quite interesting things. So you've got application will resign active, and then you'll get an explanation of what that means. It moves from an active to inactive state. So what you can do, you can write code that reacts to these events. Application did enter background, for example, is if the user had pressed the home button and maybe brought in another application, so it's backgrounded. Will enter foreground. That means that someone's now selected this backgrounded application to bring it back. Application did become active. So restarts any tasks that were paused. Application will terminate. This is usually when you've got a memory problem and the operating system has decided that your applications maybe consume too much memory or got some other problem, and it will be forced to quit. And it gives you an opportunity to do cleanup. So for example, you might save user data in these particular things, and there's several others. So these are very specific to this hardware, as you can see in here. Okay, so we won't spend any more time on the application delegate, apart from to say that every single iOS application has an application delegate, and it's also worth bearing in mind these are essential patterns. You can't break them or try to do other things. You just go along with these particular patterns. So what we have now is we're going to look at where we're going to be doing our coding. And that's really in these other files here in the view controller. So we're not going to look at that first, we're going to do something else. We're going to look at the storyboard. Okay. So this gives us a nice visual view, a bit like Visual Studio. You've got a design surface which you can drag user interface components onto, and you can see these in this box here under this title of objects, and that's what we're going to do in this case. But first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stylize this a bit just to get rid of the white background. So what I'm actually doing, there's two ways of doing this. I could either select this up here, this is my view, or I can just select it here, for example, and what I get is this attributes inspector. If you can see where my mouse is here, various other things. This is a size inspector, connections, and so on. We're mainly going to be using this attributes inspector, which again is very similar to what you would find as a properties inspector in development environments such as Visual Studio. So I'm going to set my background color to be a dark text color, which is actually black. In here, I'm happy with that now. It's a bit more in keeping with a kind of iPhone style application. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drag some of the components on that I need. So the first thing I will do is I'm going to put this slider down here somewhere near the top. Now you can see you get these guidelines which are there to give, I mean these are part of the Apple's HCI guidelines on how close you should place any component to the edge. So we wouldn't be usually doing that sort of thing. So that's about as far as we'd want it. These are fairly straightforward. I can just stretch this out. Again, I get these guidelines which are helping me. I get a little box telling me it's 280. It's got a height of 22. These are pixels in here. Okay. I can then, if I wish to, use the layout, this inspector here, and which will show me exactly the width and the height and exactly where it's placed. So it means I can do very precise layout if I wish to. And of course, it's needless to say that everything you do in this design surface, of course, you can do programmatically as well. So there's nothing stopping you building this entirely programmatically, but we're not going to do that here. So I'm now going to select this, and I'm going to have a look at my attributes inspector again and set some things up. From the example, this was going to be used to collect the age of a student, so I'm going to limit this to 30. If you're older than 30, that's fine, you limit it to whatever your age is, it doesn't really matter. And I'll set a current value of 0. Okay, notice this is, it actually is floats rather than ints, but I won't worry too much about that at this stage. Okay, so there you go, it's been limited to 30 and we've moved the slider to its current value to be 0. Okay, there's other stuff you can do. We could have a minimum maximum image, which would put little images on the left and the right hand side of these bars if we wanted to, which can be quite useful. And we can do other things with it, but we're gonna leave that as it is. The other thing I need is I'm going to add a label, which I'm going to select here. Now if you hover on these, this is quite useful. It'll actually tell you what this object actually is, and it's saying it's a thing known as a UI label, part of the UI kit, which is a framework for iOS, and it tells you what it does. It's a read-only text view, so it isn't something you can type into and change, for example. And it's great for doing just read-only text or for displaying output as well. So in this case, we're just going to use one of these for writing the sentence to ask what the user's age is. So I'm just giving it a bit of space. I can just double click into these. I'm going to say, what is your age? And so on. Now, this was already defaulted to a white font because it's on a black background. If you had white background, it would default to a black font. So I'm quite happy with that. There's no problem with that. I can, if I wish to, we could play around with the alignment, but it's okay. I'm not going to do anything more with that, so that's fine. So I'm going to then do another label, which is actually going to be used to display the user's age, and I'm going to put this right in the middle there. I don't tend to like having label, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click it, and I'm just going to put 3 dots in, which I may choose to get rid of later. The only reason I do that is it's so I know visually where the thing is. If I just have no text, obviously I can't find it, and that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag that out a bit, and I'm going to define it to be centered, and then just reposition it again, just so it sits nicely in the middle of here. Now, one thing you probably noticing, or you should be noticing, is the fact I'm not actually labeling these things. I'm not calling, at this point, I'm not saying this is label 1, slider 1, label 2, whatever I want to call these things. Okay. And if you actually hover on one of these, there doesn't appear to be anywhere I can actually do that. I can't uniquely name them. What I can do, I can tag them with a unique integer, should I wish to. So tag 0 just means nothing. Tag 1 would identify, I could identify this by a tag, and that can be quite useful. So it's bound into the way you actually build iOS, iPhone applications. Is you don't actually do this, you do something a bit different. And if you've come from NetBeans Visual Studio background, working on design surfaces like this might be a bit of a surprise to you, that why aren't we giving these things names so we can access them in our programs? And obviously that would be a good question. So we're going to show how we do that after we've finished laying out our components. Now what I can do to save time, because I now want to ask what their name is, I can actually just simply copy this label. So it's already nicely formatted for me, so I'm just going to put this up here. I'm going to keep this all nice and tight. So I'm just going to edit this and say, what is your name? So that's one way of doing it, just simply copy it. The other thing I could have done is obviously just dragged on a new UI label and use that instead. So next thing I need is this thing here, text box. So sorry, text field. Text box is a .NET name. So text field is really a UI text field, and it describes it there. It displays a rounded rectangle. When the user taps into a text field, the keyboard appears. Okay. When the user taps return the keyboard disappears. Well, maybe. Okay, we'll have a look at that, and so on. Okay, UI text field also provides a clear text control. A user taps to erase the content of the text field. So there's some behavior on it which is already built in for the user. So it's always worth reading these things so you know exactly what the properties of the component are. So I'm now going to give this a lot of room in case you've got a long name. So just going to put this down here. It's going to be a bit of an application where we're going to also use a button to submit these details. I'm going to put this at the end, just increase the size of it somewhat. Again, I can just double click in here to edit the name. Okay, double click, unlike say Visual Studio where double clicking will create an event, this doesn't do that. It's just simply to change the name. I can also, if I wish to, change the font on the name. I can change the color. I can change the color of the button and so on if I use the attributes inspector here. Again, all these components, if I want to precisely place them, I can do that by looking at this size inspector on here. Okay, so I think we are nearly ready to go. The only thing we're missing is when the button is submitted, if you remember the application when we run it at the start of the video, it would simply say your name is. And again, I could be a bit lazy and just copy the other labels, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say your name is, like so, and I will copy this one. So just copy and paste. Again, I'm not worried about the naming of these labels at the moment. Your age is. Okay. Now, what I now need is to have just 2 more labels, which I'm going to use to output these values. Because this is a name, I'm going to stretch this right out here. I'll keep it left justified, and I'm going to use just 3 dots again on here. Okay. Same again for age. I'm going to take a UI label, line it up, as you can see, using these lines. Just do 3 dots again, double click, 3 dots. Position it. Now it's going to look a bit small, so I'm just going to give that a bit of room as well. Okay. And that looks okay. Okay, what you can do is, there is a pane here in Xcode, which you'll see, and you can, if you wish to select any one of these components, you can do that, and it will also give you the constraints, which is actually to do with how it's sized, and you can edit these here as well. You may not see that on your version of Xcode, so don't worry, because we're not going to use it. Okay, so we're actually done laying out our components. You can see that I've tried to quite deliberately leave a gap here, and the reason I want to leave this gap is because this is where I expect the keyboard to pop up. So clearly I don't want the keyboard to push over the text. It might do, in which case we'll have to do something different. So what you can do, just simply to test this user interface, we've done no coding yet, won't do anything. We can now press the run button. So there's 2 ways of doing this. We can easily just press this play button up here, or if you have a look at your menu, we can go to product. If you go under menu, then go under product, you see we can run it, we can debug it, we can build it, and so on. A good shortcut for build is Control, which is like the squiggly command key, and command key and B will simply build it. So there you can see I've done that, and I've got build succeeded. So I'm happy with that. What I would tend to do then is run it, just to make sure we have no problems. Okay, looks okay. I'm going to press the. I'm going to go into this text field here, and you can see I've got a problem because I don't really like things to be covered. I prefer if I could see it, so I may just shuffle around and put things up. As you can see here, unlike as described, pressing the return key does not dismiss the keyboard. Okay, so we've got to sort that out because the keyboard's clearly in the way. So maybe I'll leave that there because it will look okay once the keyboard is dismissed. So what you then do is go back to Xcode and press the stop button. It's probably best to press stop rather than just quit the simulator, which we'll have a look at in a bit. Okay, so that's fine and that's all done. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, with the problem we've got here is we have our user interface and we have our code. Okay, so it's in this view controller. So just to talk a little bit about the view controller. Essentially the view controller will contain all the code necessary for controlling that view, for handling that view. So it will do all the logic of putting the values on the labels, collecting the data from collecting the value from the slider, handling the button event, and so on. So each view, and this is a single view application, will have a controller. So if you do a new view, you will tend to have a new view controller for it as well. That's the pattern you use in iPhone development. So how do we do this? Well, I'm going to show you a shortcut way of doing this. We go back to our storyboard, which shows our interface, And what I'm going to do, if you have a look in this part here, you will see an editor. And if you press this thing, this is actually meant to be a little guy with a dinner jacket, I think, and it's called the Assistant Editor. It's a very quick way of just getting to what I'm trying to do, which is to try to show the storyboard and my view controller files in one go. And it's sort of quite clever enough to say, well, I can see that you're looking at the storyboard for this view, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop up the view controller code that's for that view. Okay. And it's also is actually this one here as well, you can see, so there's another way of getting at it here, but we won't go into that just right now. So I've got a problem, or not a problem, but we've got the issue that we clearly need to access these components, these user interface components that we're seeing on our storyboard in our code. So a way we can do this is we can effectively turn them into properties, sort of getters and setters if you like, in our code, and there's a quick way of doing this. So the first one I'm interested in is I'm going to do the slider. So select the slider so you get the little hand, as you can see there, and then what you must do is on the keyboard press the control key. Okay, if I'm pressing it now, nothing changes, so it's not obvious, but what you then do is drag your mouse and a line should appear. What I'm going to take this line to is I'm actually going to take this line to my code, and I get this box saying insert outlet action or outlet collection. Okay, then I'm going to carefully just let go of my mouse, and I'll get this pop-up, and it's saying, what do you want to call this thing? Well, I'm going to call it slider. I've only got one of these things, so I'm just going to stick to the name slider. If I had more than one, I might say slider age or something like that. What type is it? It's a UI slider. Storage we won't go into at this point, but generally you will be using weak storage. So what I can then do is I just simply connect it. Okay. For the type, that is really just telling you what it is, and you can see here it's a UI slider, so it's fairly straightforward. So if I connect it, I then get this property, weak, non-atomic, IB outlet, UI slider. Now these don't really want to explain too much of this, but apart from to say that if you have something such as at property, this partners with another statement which is synthesize. But actually all it is really doing is it's creating a load of hidden getters and setters, and it allows me to access things on this slider using a dot method. So I can do things like slider.value, which will give me the floating point value of whatever it's been set to. And this is just peculiar to iOS and OS X development. Okay, so that's what we do, and we're going to repeat that. So the next thing we want is we want access to this label because we want to put a value on it. So again, highlight it, control, drag it onto the code. Okay, it might take a bit of practice this, but you'll get it. What I will tend to do is call it label, and you'll see why I do that in a minute. So if I say label, it represents the age. So I'm actually going to call this age value. Is a reasonable name for this. What type is it? It's a UI label, that's fine, storage weak, outlet, and so on, and we're done. So what you want to do is just repeat this for everything you want to do. So we want the text box, and I'm going to call this text name. I will take these labels here because I need to put some values on these. Again, I'm carefully calling these labels. Which one is it? It's the name, so I'm going to say label name. And then I'm going to do this one, age. Okay, I'm going to call that label age. Okay, I've used label age value for the value of the slider. That's why I'm using a slightly different name here. So I might call this label age output, just so I'm absolutely clear what it is. Okay, and we're done with that. And finally, the only thing I probably need is the button now. Okay, may not need this, so I'm going to leave this because I don't really need to know anything about the button. I just need to know that it's been pressed. So we're not going to do that one. We're going to do something different there. Okay, so Once we've got that, we've just got a couple of more things to do, and to do them I'm going to switch to the other view. If we look here, I have this thing saying automatic tutorial view controller, the header file, and I'm now interested in the implementation file. Okay, if we have a look at this, we've got a thing, a couple of methods are in here, which is view.did.load. View.did.load means literally the view that you're looking at has now been loaded and you want to now do something else. Okay, again, we have one more given to us here. There's lots of these methods. To keep it simple, only a couple of them are shown here, but there's many of these methods on view controllers that come with it. And the other one you can see is did receive memory warning, so you can do some cleanup there if you wish to. We're not going to use any of these for this particular exercise, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a bit of space here. And I'm going to do a similar trick to what we did before. In this instance, I'm not interested in setting these things up as properties that I can access. I'm now interested in the events. So the way you would go about doing this in an iOS application from a storyboard is, let's do the button first, and I'll press the control key. Okay, I'm going to now drag this in, and notice I'm dragging this into the implementation file, not the header file. If I put it in the header file, it would just appear as a property, but I don't want that. I actually want an action, so read action, read event if you like. I'm trying to catch some event. So what do I want to call this? Well, I'm just going to call it something like submit touched. Okay, I'm not using the word pressed or clicked because that doesn't really make sense in the context of an iPhone. So touched or pressed you could do, but you just wouldn't use clicked. Okay, so the event is a touch up inside. There are, if I look at this, there's lots of other events that could have happened. A touch up inside is actually where the user touches the button, but it actually allows them to remove their finger off the button if they change their mind, as long as they stay in contact with it. As opposed to a touch down, which is if you've touched down and you take your finger outside, it will still always fire off. So touch up inside is just slightly better for the user because it gives us an option to cancel. And you'd have to, for the rest of these, you'd kind of need to look up what they do if they're you don't understand from reading the titles of them. Okay. Type ID, don't worry too much about that. It's just a void type. I could say UI button there, it would be absolutely fine, but I can also, if ID is just simply means that it could be any type and I'll have to cast it to be whatever it is. We're not using that in this. Argument is the sender. Now this is, if you've done any events in Java or in C#, this is more or less the same. What you do is you have an event is fired, and what you tend to pass is the sender of the event. It was a button that was pressed, it was a text box that was changed, and then the arguments of the event. And that might include the pixels, so the X and Y, perhaps where the button was or where it was touched and so on. In this case, I'm not interested in anything, so I'm probably going to say none. So I've got this method, but I don't really want any arguments. I'm not interested in what button was pressed, nor am I actually interested in the event, because I know I've only got one and I don't need to know it. It's just going to be the touch up inside, so it just keeps it simple. And then finally I'm going to connect that. Okay, go press Command B just to check there's no errors in your code. If you've got errors, it can get a bit messy tidying them up, but do your best and follow the tutorial video again from that point. Okay, so not going to do anything because I've not done any implementation there on that one. So the other thing I need is, what I want to do is update this value when the slider changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the slider and do the same trick. I want a new action. I'm going to just drop that in there. Okay. So I'm going to call this slider value changed. Okay, it's a good description. Again, argument, not that interested, so I'll say none again for this. The event I want is value change. There's lots of other events in there, but that's the one I want. So this event will get fired when the user moves the slider bar. Okay, I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to connect that up. give myself a bit of room in here. Okay, so what we've done, just to recap, and this is very similar to what you do in pretty much all iOS development. This is the pattern that you would adopt. Is in the header file, I've set up various user interface elements that I wish to access. So it's one of the reasons you don't have any labeling here, is because if you just highlight these, you can see the connection between the user interface elements and these properties here. When you see property, this at property, weak non-atomic, really you can just see this as very similar to properties in any other language, where essentially it would be, get slider dot value, set slider dot value, and so on. So I can access the attributes of these user interface elements via these properties. So it's just something you need to get used to in iOS development, but it's actually fairly straightforward. In the implementation file, which is here, all I've done is I've set up two IB actions. Out of interest, IB stands for Interface Builder. So this is saying it's an action which is coming via Interface Builder, which is the name of this thing. It's actually a bit archaic now, because Interface Builder used to be a separate application. It's now built into Xcode, but that's what that means. It just means it's an action that's come from something on the storyboard. And we have a submit touched, okay, which is this button here, and we have slider value change, and this is where we're going to do some work inside these two methods. So let's do our first bit of work inside the slider value change, and then we'll get to see how the properties work as well. So what we can do in Objective-C, we have this idea of self, okay, which is if you from Java or C# would be this, so very similar to this. So what we're after is the slider, and so I'm just going to start typing. Now it's one of the reasons why I always name things to be what they are. So it's easy. If I called it age slider, I probably forgot I'd called it age slider, and I wouldn't be able to find it. But if I call it slider age or something like this, then I just have to start typing the name of the thing, and it appears. To do a completion, you can just press tab. Now I'm going to put another dot in here, so this should be familiar, because it's very similar to the sort of thing that you're doing in Visual Studio and other things. So what I'm going to do, so that's what I'll do. This is how I access these properties. Okay, like so. Okay, I'm going to leave that for now, because what I want to do is actually start the left hand side and put this value onto a label. So we'll do it all in one go rather than breaking it up. So I'm going to do self dot, again, label. Now I want the label age output. So this label age value, this is the one I used for the slider, which is the one, it's a label just underneath the slider. Okay, tab dot, again, get lots of different methods and properties on here, but I know what I want is text. I just want to set the text of that particular label. Equals. Now this will be new if you've not done any Objective-C, and this is how you essentially write Objective-C methods. As we're not really covering Objective-C here, we'll just have to go along with it for now. So we're going to use an object called an NS string. Okay, and we want it to be formatted. So it's a string with format. Okay, there, and it's asking for another string argument. We want to do an integer. That's all we want to display. Obviously your age is an integer thing, you're not usually 25.5 and so on. So the way we're going to do this formatting is like so. Okay. And then it's very similar to the way you would do, say, a C specification of when you're doing formatted strings. I need to then get the value from the slider, because this is what I want to actually place on the label. So I've got self dot. I'm going to do is write self.slider dot value Okay, I'm just going to wait a minute, so I'll sort out what this problem is here. Aha, spotted it. I've got too many dots there. Okay, that's better. Okay, slider.value. Now, this is expecting a floating. This particular string is expecting to see an integer. What is returned from self.slider.value is actually a float. That's just the way. That's just the property of that particular element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little cast here to make sure that what gets returned, or the message that this is where you'd say it normally in iOS, is that the message that gets sent to this receiver is the correct type and it is in fact an integer. Okay, so just build this, make sure everything's okay. So we should now actually have something that's working. So we can now go ahead and we'll test this. Okay, that seems to be working fine. So we can move on. That's good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to handle the code inside the submit touched, which is the event that happens when someone touches that button. And what we're trying to do is we're just trying to put their age, which we can either take that from the label, but we'll take it straight from the slider again. And then we're going to take the value of their name inside the text field, and we're going to put this on this label here on the storyboard. So we're just going to do these two things. So we'll do this one first with the age, because we've already done something similar. So we have self.label age output. That's the one I want this time. I can just press the tab button to move along these. .text equals. Now what I'm going to do is just simply take this code again here, like so, and that will work fine. That's one. And we're now going to do the name. So label name dot text equals, in this case all I want to do is collect the text from the text box, so I'm going to say text, no, I can't remember what I called it. Let's check. Okay, so it's text name, self.text name, there it is, UI text field, and I simply want to take the text inside the text field and set that to be the value of the text of the label. Okay. So we're done. Okay, let's run this and we're going to see what happens. So we have this, that's working all nicely. I'm going to type my name in. I'm going to press submit. We have a problem. The keyboard's not dismissing, it's in the way, and we can't see the other bit of text. So this is a common problem. Lots of different ways to handling the keyboard. What you can do, if you want to keep the keyboard present, you can actually just push up the view. So you could actually slide this view up, and there's lots of ways of animating views and doing this sort of thing if I wish to do this. But generally, I want to see this return doesn't work, and so what I want to do is be able to dismiss this keyboard so it's out the way as soon as the user presses the submit button, in this case. So what we do, there's a bit of code that you need to learn to dismiss the keyboard. We're in here because this is where we want to do it. So I'm just going to write comment, this will dismiss the keyboard. Okay. So what we do here then is we write a bit of code, is we look for the thing that's got control of the keyboard, that's responded, or the keyboard's responded to, and it's in fact our text field which is called text name. And what we're going to do is we're just going to ask it to resign the keyboard. And what you need to do that is you call this method called resign first responder. Notifies the receiver that it's been asked to relinquish its status as the first responder in its window. Rather complicated way of saying dismiss the keyboard. So there we go. Okay, we'll run the application now, test it. Okay, we can set the age, type in your name, makes a keyboard appear, press the submit button, and now the keyboard slides back down and disappears. So that's the end of the build part of this tutorial. What there will be, you'll find on Blackboard, is there'll be some further exercises for you to do, which is just really to play around this, add some new things, maybe try and change the colours, and so on. So once you've completed this, got it working, you may well have saved this onto the desktop, so if you want to keep it, good idea to mail it to yourself, zip it, mail it, move it to a memory stick and so on, in case you want to use it in the future. So this is the end of this tutorial and this introduction to your first iPhone application.